Hey everybody, my name is Andrew Bennett. I'm a licensed clinical marriage and family therapist. I've been practicing for almost 15 years. During that time, I have seen a lot of kiddos designated as SED or severely emotionally disturbed, as well as children and adults on the autism spectrum. It has been my experience that a lot of the behavioral and emotional issues that my clients have struggled with were due to an inability to verbally express how they were feeling in a situation or how they felt about the situation. In fact, when asked to identify any emotions, these kiddos struggle with naming more than mad or bored. They could, however, name all the characters from popular trading card games, name all of the evolutions these characters had, as well as identify what types these characters belong to in the game. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if there were a card game that had the feel of those other games, but dealt only with emotions? And after looking and not finding anything, I developed one on my own. And that brings us to the point of this video. I'd like to introduce you to Emoto. It's a self-contained card-playing game designed to increase emotional vocabulary, as well as emotion recognition and emotion regulation. Now, the game of Emoto itself consists of 6 emotion categories and 4 types of action cards. First off, the 6 emotion categories, we have anger, sadness, fear, calm, happiness, and kindness. Now, as you can tell, each one of the categories has a designated color. In addition to that, there's a facial expression on each of the cards that represents that emotion category. Now, within the emotion category, there are characters, or what we call emotos. There are 14 per category. We're going to look at anger just as an example. So as you notice, the anger cards will have the red border around them. Likewise, the sadness cards will have a blue border, fear cards will have a black border. So these are very easily recognizable when the kids are playing. They can look at the card and go, oh, this is an anger category card. Also, the name of the character on top is an emotion found in the anger category. We have annoyed here, for example. The cards themselves will range from a low level to a mid level to a high level range of emotions. Annoyed happens to be a low level. If you look up here at the top right hand corner, there is one face that designates the low level. We move on to belligerent. Belligerent happens to have 2 faces in the top right hand corner, designating him as a mid level emotion. And then finally we move on to maybe a card like hateful, who happens to have 3 faces here representing a high-level emotion card. So just at first glance, you notice the color, the name, and also the designation in the top right-hand corner of what level they are. Each illustration is also original and hand-drawn for this game. The characters on the cards show body expressions and facial expressions that represent the emotion that they are representing. The bottom part of that card will have special abilities that will be involved in the playing of the game, and the bottom left-hand corner shows you the intensity and defensive powers that we'll talk about later about how you use them in battle. In addition to the 14 cards per category, there are action cards that can be played in the game. First one, emotional block, emotional flood, emotional recall, and share your emotions. Each one of these cards represents a different action that you can play during the game. For example, share your emotions, you would trade your hand with a player of your choice. Emotional recall, you can bring a card out of your discard pile and put it back into your hand. Emotional flood allows you to get more cards in your hand. And finally, emotional block is a defensive card blocking a player's action that they are trying to do. With that, let's go ahead and get into a little bit more of how to play the game. So the game is designed to be played with 2 to 4 players. Depending on how many players you have will depend on how you divide the deck. First, you take out the 6 emotion category cards and place them between the players. Also, there are going to be what to do on your turn cards, which will be easy reference guides for players as they play. Each player will have one by their side. Finally, you have the 120 card deck. If you're playing with 2 players, you will divide that into 2 decks of 60. You can actually count out 60 each, or you can just divide it and make sure that they're even. If you're playing with 3 players, you'll have 3 decks of 40. And finally, if you're playing with 2 teams of 2, you will have 4 decks of 30 cards each. So at the very beginning, kind of how you decide who goes first, simply take your 6 emotion category cards, choose one of them. We're going to choose Fear. We're going to mix these up, and then the players will just take turns flipping over a card until one of the players flips over the Fear card of that choice. Whoever flips over that card that was designated at the beginning is the player that will go first in the game. So to start with, each player will take 7 cards from their deck and put them in their hand. And this will be the cards that they start out with. The first player who plays can do up to 3 turns, up to 3 actions during his turn. The first thing he can do is put an Emoto card in play. Now, an Emoto card, again, is the character card that you have. To put an Emoto card in play, they would take that card out of their hand and put it face down. This card cannot be accessed or used to battle until their next turn. If it happens to be their next turn and they have a card in play, they can simply access it by flipping it over. By accessing it, they now have access to the special ability that is here on the bottom to use during battle. For example, this one says Furious does not lose any intensity points after its first attack. Intensity points are then lost after its second attack. So you can use this strategically on how you want to play that. You can also use an action card. I have a Share Your Emotions card in my hand. If I didn't like the cards that were in my hand, I could play this. We would switch hands with the player, and I would get their cards, they would get mine. Finally, you can just simply draw a card. If you don't like what you have, you simply draw a card. At the very end of your turn, you discard or draw to bring your hand back up to 7 cards. If I do decide to discard some cards, these cards here become my discard pile or my spent emotions pile, which we will talk about later on in the game. If I am going to battle, which is one part of the game, I'm going to take my Furious card and I'm going to say battle. He has a Serene card here. I'm going to battle his Serene card that he has out. I can take this and I notice here that I have 3 intensity points. Those are the points I'm going to use to attack with. He has 3 defensive points here. So if I attack with my 3 and hit him with 3, then he goes down to 0. You do not actually capture one of their cards until they go below 0. If I hit him with 3, he goes down to 0. He is just left at a point where he is just defenseless. However, he happens to have a special ability here that says all Fear, Sadness, and Anger cards lose 1 intensity and 1 defensive points when battling this specific card. So if I were to attack with Furious and attack Serene, I automatically lose 1 each and I drop down to a 2/2. So now I'm only doing 2 damage to him and he is left with 1 intensity point. When I use a card to attack, it doesn't matter how many intensity points I have. As soon as I use them, all intensity points are gone. So I turn the card sideways to indicate I have used all my intensity points. Now sometimes my kiddos, when we're playing, they can calculate in their head which cards have how many defensive points left, which cards have others. I, however, do not always have that ability. So we use counters. We can use coins. If I have 2 defensive points on him, I can put 2 on here. If he was knocked down to 1, he would have 1 counter there. So next time I attack, I can know how many defensive points each card has. You can also use macaronis. You can use dried beans. You could use those little clear marbles with the flat bottoms on them as well, if you would like. Now, as you're playing and you have a field of where your cards are, your opponent will have a field where their cards are on the other side. You can have up to 5 Emotos in play, either in play or accessed at one time. No more than 5. So once one card is attacked and maybe defeated, let's say I was able to actually defeat Serene. Serene then goes into my opponent's emotionally spent pile. I would then gain control of the calm card out of the middle because serene is a calm category card. As you're playing, these cards will go back and forth. If my opponent happens to be one of my calm cards, they would then gain access to the calm card. When all 6 cards in the middle are in control of one player or another, the first player to get 4 out of the 6 card wins. If one player's in possession of 3, the other player's in possession of 3, the first player to get up to 4 wins the game. And that is how you play Emoto. Let's talk a little bit more about how to play action cards while you are battling your opponent. We'll take Emotional Flood for an example. During your play, it says you force an opponent to show your hand. So they show their hand, you look at their hand and take 2 cards of your choice from their hand, add them to yours. You then have to discard to get back to that 7 cards in your hand. They then have to draw back up to get 7 in their hand. You also have an option, if you play this card, to draw 3 cards from your draw pile, again discarding any cards in your hand to bring your hand back down to 7. So the Emotional Flood basically allows you to bring in more cards into your hand rather than just drawing from your deck. An Emotional Recall card. If you happen to have a specific card that you really like that has been defeated and has been sent to your emotionally spent pile, you can play this card and say, I want to recall a card from my deck. You go through your deck, find the card you want, and put it back into your hand, being able to use it and its special abilities when you play the card later on down the road. And you Share Your Emotions card. Again, if you don't like the cards in your hand, you want to change them out, you play this card, you switch hands with the player that you want, you now get their cards, they get your cards. Now, if somebody plays one of these action cards and you don't like it, you don't want to show your hand, you don't want to share your emotions with them, you can play what is called an emotional block card. This blocks any action card that anyone is playing. An emotional block card can also block an emotional block card. And what that means is if they play emotional block and say, I don't want to show you my hand, you happen to have an emotional block card, you can play an emotional block card, block that, and then they would go forward again. Now, another option that you have with the emotional block card is if you happen to have 2 of emotional blocks in your hand, you can play both of these at once, forcing your opponent to lose their turn. Now, this does count as 2 of the 3 actions that you are allowed to do during your turn. So let's say, for example, you have a high level and a low level card in your hand. You're wanting to defeat maybe a high level card in their hand, and you have these accessed, but they're in play, but they're not accessed. So you use one of your turns to access a card. You use 2 of your turns to play 2 emotional blocks, forcing them to lose their turn. You play the 2 blocks, they lose their turn, you draw back up to 7, it's your turn again. You now have 3 more turns. You can access your Fondness card, and you now have a 3-3 and a 1-1. You attack with your 3-3, dropping his card down to possibly 0 defensive points, and then attack with your 1-1, dropping him down to a -1, then you can capture his card that way. So strategically, you can use that in battle. If your opponent happens to have 2 emotional blocks in their hand, they can block the 2 emotional blocks by playing those. And that is a quick, brief explanation on how to use your action cards in battle.